They said humans were just another species fumbling around the galaxy with delusions of grandeur, until Dr. Kess Valdrin started finding impossible artifacts that shouldn't exist, carved with symbols that made alien archaeologists very, very uncomfortable. What she discovered in those ancient fragments wasn't just evidence of humanity's forgotten past, but proof that every advanced civilization in the galaxy had been playing with humanity's leftover toys for thousands of years. The academic establishment called her a student chasing fantasies. But when she followed those mythological breadcrumbs to their source, she didn't just rewrite galactic history. She became the one holding the keys to everyone's future. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to HFY Havoc, hit the bell, and like this video. Because if you want more epic HFY sci-fi stories like this one, you don't want to miss out. Now, let's dive into a tale where being underestimated becomes the ultimate cosmic advantage, and where one human archaeologist is about to teach the galaxy that sometimes the student becomes the one everyone else needs to learn from. The Helix Institute's reputation for academic excellence was built on 3 pillars: rigorous methodology, peer review, and the institutional certainty that humans were fascinating in the same way that watching primitive species discover fire was fascinating, which made Kess Valdrin's current predicament all the more awkward. She stared at the holographic projection rotating above her workstation, displaying what appeared to be a fragment of ceramic bearing unmistakably human astronomical symbols. The problem was simple. This particular fragment had been excavated from a dig site on Keftar, a world humans had never visited, buried in geological strata that predated human spaceflight by roughly 4,000 years. Still playing with your impossible toys, I see. Dr. Jin's voice carried that particular Vorthak inflection that managed to sound bored and condescending simultaneously. His chitinous frame filled the doorway to Kess's lab, 6 limbs arranged in what his species considered a posture of academic superiority. Still confusing skepticism with intellectual rigor, I see, Kess replied without looking up from her work. Jin's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The human capacity for self-deception never ceases to amaze me. You've been chasing these fragments for what, 3 standard cycles now? And your grand theory remains what exactly? That your species somehow traveled the galaxy in primitive chemical rockets, leaving behind cave paintings. The theory, Kess said, finally turning to face him, is that these artifacts suggest human presence in regions of space that predate our recorded history by millennia. The implications, interrupted a new voice, are that someone is playing an elaborate joke, and you're the punchline. Supervisor Nenth drifted into the room with that unsettling, ethereal grace, her translucent form barely disturbing the air currents. Where Jin's skepticism came wrapped in academic arrogance, Nenth's dismissal felt more like pity. Contamination remains the most logical explanation, Nenth continued, her voice carrying harmonics that made human ears itch. Archaeological sites are notoriously susceptible to modern intrusion. A careless graduate student, perhaps, or a maintenance worker with human mythology downloaded to their neural implant. Kess gestured at the hologram. Contamination doesn't explain the geological integration. These fragments aren't sitting on top of ancient strata. They're chemically bonded to mineral deposits that formed over thousands of years. Sophisticated contamination, then, Jin suggested. Your species does have a talent for elaborate fiction. Perhaps someone decided to make it convincing. Right. Someone spent decades and enormous resources planting fake artifacts across 17 different star systems, in dig sites operated by 7 different species, all to perpetuate the myth that humans are somehow special. Kess's tone could have etched glass. That's your professional opinion? More plausible than the alternative, Nenth observed, which appears to be that humans developed interstellar travel established a galactic presence, then somehow forgot about it entirely and regressed to a pre-technological state, all while leaving no trace except random pottery shards. Mythology, Jin added with obvious relish, is not archaeology. Your species' tendency to confuse wishful thinking with scientific inquiry is well documented. Kess had heard variations of this conversation more times than she cared to count. The academic establishment's position on human mythology was carved in institutional stone. It was primitive fantasy, the psychological artifact of a young species trying to cope with its cosmic insignificance. Dragons, gods, heroes who could reshape reality. Clearly the desperate imaginings of beings who had barely mastered fire when other species were already trading between star systems. Have either of you actually examined the compositional analysis? Kess asked. We've read your reports, Nenth replied, which wasn't the same thing. Then you know the ceramic matrices don't match any known human manufacturing techniques. The metallurgical signatures are inconsistent with current human industrial capacity, and the astronomical references are accurate to a precision that suggests advanced computational modeling. Jin's mandibles spread wider, or access to current star charts and modern fabrication equipment. The star charts are wrong, though. Kess pulled up another hologram. They show stellar positions that were accurate 4,000 years ago, accounting for proper motion and stellar drift. If someone was fabricating these with current astronomical data, they'd reflect modern positions. Coincidence, Jin said, though he sounded slightly less certain. Across 17 different artifacts, with mathematical precision that would require quantum-level computational modeling to fake? Humans, Nenth said with that particular ethereal patience reserved for explaining obvious things to slow children, are ingenious when it comes to supporting their preferred narratives. I'm sure if we investigated thoroughly enough, we'd find some perfectly mundane explanation. Kess was about to respond when her workstation chimed. New data from the Archaeological Survey on Threnody Prime, a dead world in the Outer Rim that had been yielding interesting artifacts for the past several months. What now? Jin asked, noting her expression. Kess opened the file, expecting another fragment of pottery or maybe a metallic tool bearing human symbolic systems. Instead, she found herself staring at something that made her academic training collide violently with her understanding of galactic history. Well, Nenth prompted. It's a star map, Kess said quietly. Another fragment of human pottery with astronomical decorations? Jin sounded bored again. No. Kess's voice was barely above a whisper. It's a complete navigational chart, carved in stone, and it shows stellar positions for a region of space that doesn't exist in any current galactic database. She transferred the image to the main display. The carved stone showed a three-dimensional star chart with mathematical precision, complete with gravitational calculations and trajectory markers. But more unsettling were the symbols surrounding the central system. Symbols that were unmistakably human mythological references, but arranged in what appeared to be technical specifications. Fabrication, Jin said immediately, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Maybe, Kess said, except the stone shows geological weathering consistent with the planetary environment over several thousand years. And there's something else. She highlighted a section of the carving. These coordinates, they point to a stellar region that our surveys indicate is empty space. No stars, no systems, nothing. Which proves it's fake, Jin said, though he was leaning closer to the display. Or, Kess replied, it proves our surveys missed something. Nenth drifted nearer, her form shimmering with what might have been curiosity or concern. You're suggesting we mount an expedition based on coordinates carved into a rock by unknown beings thousands of years ago? I'm suggesting, Kess said, "that we're looking at evidence of something that challenges our fundamental assumptions about galactic history. And if I'm right, then everything we think we know about human mythology, human origins, and human capabilities is incomplete." "And if you're wrong?" Jin asked. Kess looked at the star map, at the impossible precision of its astronomical calculations and the familiar symbols that her species had carried in their collective unconscious for millennia. "If I'm wrong, then we waste some time and resources proving that humans really are just clever storytellers with delusions of grandeur." "And if you're right?" Nenth asked. Kess didn't answer immediately. She was thinking about the implications of advanced astronomical knowledge appearing in supposedly primitive human mythology, about the mathematical precision required to predict stellar positions thousands of years in advance, about the possibility that her species' stories weren't stories at all. "If I'm right," she said finally, "then everyone's understanding of who belongs where in the galactic hierarchy might need some revision." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of academic careers built on very specific assumptions about human capabilities and cosmic significance. "I'll need a small survey ship," Kess said into that silence, "and a minimal crew willing to investigate coordinates that may or may not lead to empty space." "Absolutely not," Jin said immediately. "Actually," Nenth said slowly, her harmonics carrying an undertone of intrigue, "it might be worthwhile, if only to definitively disprove this theory and put the matter to rest." Jin's compound eyes fixed on the ethereal supervisor. "You're seriously considering this?" "I'm considering the academic value of thoroughly debunking persistent pseudo-archaeological claims," Nenth replied smoothly. "A comprehensive investigation that finds nothing but empty space would be far more convincing than theoretical arguments." Kess suppressed a smile. Academic politics, like gravity, was a universal constant. Nenth wanted the professional credit for definitively proving human mythology was just mythology. Jin wanted to be present for the inevitable collapse of Kess's theories. 3 days, Nenth decided. Minimal crew, basic survey equipment. When you find nothing but void and vacuum, I expect a full report acknowledging the speculative nature of your previous work. And when I find something that shouldn't exist according to our current understanding of galactic history, Kess asked. Nenth's form shimmered with what might have been amusement. Then, my dear Doctor Valdrin, we'll have a very different conversation indeed. The survey vessel Methodical Inquiry was aptly named, being the sort of ship that approached the universe with bureaucratic thoroughness and all the excitement of a tax audit. Which suited Kess perfectly, since her companions for this expedition had made it abundantly clear they expected to find absolutely nothing worth getting excited about. "Approaching coordinates in 17 minutes, announced pilot Corvin from the helm, his saurian vocal cords managing to make stellar navigation sound like reading a grocery list. "Sensor sweep indicates standard cosmic background radiation, minimal dust concentrations, and precisely 0 signs of anything resembling civilization, ancient or otherwise." How disappointing, Dr. Jin observed from his position at the science station, though his mandibles suggested he found this lack of discovery deeply satisfying. Almost as if someone carved random coordinates into a rock and called it archaeology. Nenth drifted between workstations, her translucent form flickering with something that might have been anticipation. "Perhaps we'll at least find some interesting stellar phenomena. The expedition won't be entirely wasted if we can catalog some unusual gravitational anomalies." Kess monitored her own instruments, watching for any deviation from the expected nothing. The carved star map had been precise enough to navigate by, which either meant someone had possessed remarkably advanced astronomical knowledge 4,000 years ago, or someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create a convincing fake. Neither option made complete sense. "Wait," Corvin's voice carried a note of confusion. "That's unusual." "Define unusual," Jin demanded, suddenly more alert. I'm detecting gravitational distortions consistent with a large mass concentration, but visual scans show empty space. Nenth moved to peer over the pilot's shoulder, her harmonics taking on a puzzled resonance. Equipment malfunction? Negative. I'm running full diagnostics. Gravitational sensors are functioning normally. But according to these readings, there's something massive out there that we can't see. Kess felt her pulse quicken. Can you pinpoint the source? Corvin's clawed fingers danced over his controls. Approximately 2 million kilometers ahead, bearing Mark 77. Whatever it is, it's got the mass signature of a small moon. Which would be visible, Jin pointed out with irritating logic. Unless it's cloaked, Kess suggested. Or unless your mythical ancestors possessed technology we don't, Nenth added, with what sounded suspiciously like sarcasm. The next 15 minutes passed in tense silence as they approached coordinates that should have contained nothing but vacuum. Corvin's instruments continued insisting that something large and solid occupied the space ahead, while their visual scanners remained stubbornly blank. Contact, Corvin announced suddenly. Visual confirmation. The main display flickered to life, showing what appeared to be the impossible made manifest. A massive ring-shaped structure hung in the darkness, easily 50 kilometers in diameter, its surface covered in architectural details that suggested both incredible age and breathtaking technological sophistication. But what made Kess's breath catch wasn't the engineering. It was the decorative motifs covering every visible surface. Those are human mythological symbols, she said quietly. Coincidence, Jin said automatically, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. That many coincidences would violate several fundamental laws of probability, Nenth observed. The symbols appear to be integrated into the structure itself, not added later. Kess stared at the display, watching familiar images scroll past as their ship moved closer. Dragons and phoenixes, tree of life motifs, stellar mandalas that matched human cultural symbols she'd studied since graduate school. But they weren't crude cave paintings. They were executed with architectural precision and integrated into technology that made current galactic civilization look primitive. Pilot, can you get us closer? She asked. Already moving to establish standard orbital approach, Corvin replied, his professional composure not quite hiding his amazement. Whatever this thing is, it's old, really old. These readings suggest the outer hull has been exposed to cosmic radiation for thousands of years. Any signs of active systems? Jin asked. Multiple energy signatures, dormant but not dead. It's like the whole structure is sleeping. As they drew nearer, details became clearer. The ring world wasn't just decorated with human mythology. It was a three-dimensional encyclopedia of it. Kess could see architectural elements that matched descriptions from dozens of human cultural traditions. Crystalline spires that belonged in fairy tales, metal trees that could have grown in digital dreams, geometric patterns that human mathematicians had only recently begun to understand. This is impossible, Jin muttered. The construction alone would require resources and knowledge beyond current galactic capabilities. And yet, Nenth said softly, here it is. Can you establish communication? Kess asked. Corvin's displays flickered through various scanning protocols. I'm detecting what might be docking facilities, and there's something else, some kind of automated beacon just activated. The ship's communication system chimed with an incoming transmission. When Corvin opened the channel, a voice filled the bridge, speaking perfect, unaccented standard Galactic. Welcome, descendants of Terra. You have traveled far to reach the Threshold Archive. Please proceed to Docking Facility 7 for processing and orientation. The silence that followed was profound enough to have its own gravitational field. Descendants of Terra? Jin's voice cracked slightly. It knows we're human, Kess said, though she wasn't sure if she was amazed or terrified. It knows you're human, Nenth corrected. The rest of us appear to be along for the ride. Another chime from the communications array. Dr. Kess Valdrin, your research into scattered cultural fragments has been noted and evaluated. You have been selected for advanced instruction in your species' actual history. Your companions are welcome to observe, though their preconceptions may require adjustment. How does it know my name? Kess whispered. More importantly, Jin said, his skepticism finally showing cracks. What does it mean by actual history? The voice continued with the patience of a teacher, addressing particularly slow students. Your species operates under several fundamental misapprehensions regarding its origins and capabilities. These misapprehensions were deliberately cultivated for reasons that will become clear during orientation. Please dock at Facility 7 within the next standard hour. And if we refuse, Nenth asked, then you will return to your respective institutions with fascinating but ultimately inexplicable sensor data, and humanity will continue its current trajectory toward eventual species-wide mediocrity. The choice is yours. Corvin looked at his passengers with the expression of someone who'd signed up for a routine survey mission and found himself at the center of a galactic paradigm shift. Orders? Kess stared at the ring world, at the impossible fusion of her species' mythology and technology that shouldn't exist. Every archaeological instinct she possessed was screaming that this was the discovery that would redefine everything. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming that some discoveries were too dangerous to make. Dock at Facility 7, she said. Kess, Jin began. We came here to investigate, she interrupted. Now we investigate. By walking into what's obviously a trap, the Vorthak demanded. By walking into what's obviously the answer, Kess replied. Unless you're suddenly afraid that human mythology might be more than mythology. Jin's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of severe agitation. I'm afraid that we're about to discover something that calls into question everything we think we know about galactic history. Good, Kess said. It's about time someone did. As they approached Docking Facility 7, Kess caught herself thinking about the voice that had greeted them. It had spoken of scattered cultural fragments and actual history, of preconceptions requiring adjustment. Most unsettling of all, it had spoken as if it had been waiting for her specifically. Docking complete, Corvin announced. External sensors indicate a pressurized environment with atmosphere suitable for all aboard. Of course it does, Nenth said with ethereal dryness, because apparently this ancient human artifact is considerate of alien biological requirements. The airlock cycled, revealing a corridor that belonged in no architectural tradition Kess recognized. The walls curved with organic grace while displaying geometric precision, covered in symbols that shifted between familiar human mythology and mathematical equations that hurt to look at directly. After you, Doctor? Valdrin, said a new voice, not from their ship's communication system, but from speakers embedded in the corridor walls. Your education in the true nature of humanity is about to begin. Kess stepped through the airlock, followed reluctantly by her companions. Behind them, the methodical inquiry sealed itself against whatever they were about to discover. One question, Jin called out as they walked deeper into the structure. If this is all real, if humans really did build this place, then where did they go? The voice that answered carried undertones of something that might have been sadness. They became something else. The question is whether their children are ready to learn what that means. The chamber they were led to defied several basic principles of interior architecture, mostly by being larger inside than the structure containing it should have allowed. Kess had stopped questioning physical impossibilities roughly 10 minutes ago, around the time they'd passed a corridor junction where the floors curved into walls that became ceilings without any discernible transition point. Spatial distortion technology, Nenth murmured, her form shimmering with something approaching professional envy. The mathematical requirements alone would challenge our best theorists. Which brings us to an interesting question, said the entity that had been guiding them. A holographic projection that seemed to prefer the appearance of a middle-aged human wearing robes that belonged in a fantasy epic. How do you suppose pre-technological humans developed capabilities that surpass your current scientific understanding? The entity had introduced itself as the Keeper, though Kess suspected that was more job description than name. It moved with the fluid grace of advanced AI, but spoke with the tired patience of someone who'd been explaining complicated concepts to slow students for several thousand years. They didn't, Jin said firmly, apparently having decided that aggressive skepticism was his best defense against paradigm collapse. This is clearly the work of some other species, probably one that went extinct before current galactic civilization developed. An extinct species that happened to use human cultural symbols exclusively, the Keeper asked with mild amusement. How remarkably coincidental. More coincidental than humans developing interstellar civilization and then forgetting about it entirely, Jin shot back. Actually, the Keeper said, that's exactly what happened. Kess felt something cold settle in her stomach. Explain. The chamber around them shifted, walls becoming transparent displays that showed star charts, historical timelines, and cultural development maps spanning millennia. The information was overwhelming, but the basic pattern was unmistakable. Human civilization hadn't begun on Earth. It had ended there. Your species didn't evolve on the world you call home, the Keeper continued conversationally. Terra was a refuge colony, established during the final phase of what your degraded cultural memory calls Ragnarok, or the Twilight of the Gods, or the War in Heaven, depending on which mythological tradition managed to preserve fragments of the actual events. That's impossible, Nenth said, though her harmonics suggested she was struggling to maintain conviction. Current human genetics support isolated population development consistent with refugee colonization, the Keeper replied. Your archaeologists simply assumed the genetic bottlenecks indicated primitive origins rather than civilizational collapse. The displays showed human settlements scattered across hundreds of worlds, connected by technology that made current galactic infrastructure look like stone tools, cities that floated between dimensions, starships that traveled by folding space-time, communication networks that operated through quantum consciousness manipulation. We built all this, Kess asked quietly. You built more than this. The current galactic civilization uses technologies reverse-engineered from human ruins. Faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, even basic terraforming, all of it developed by studying abandoned human installations. Corvin spoke for the first time since they'd docked. You're saying we're living in the ruins of human civilization? You're saying you're the inheritors of human innovation, the Keeper corrected. The question is what you've done with that inheritance. Jin's mandibles were clicking rapidly. If humans were so advanced, what happened to them? The displays shifted, showing something that made Kess's trained archaeological mind struggle to process the implications. It was a war, but not fought with conventional weapons. The combatants were using technology that manipulated reality itself, rewriting physical laws, creating pocket universes, transforming matter at the subatomic level. Civil war, the Keeper said simply. Two factions emerged with incompatible visions for humanity's future. The Ascendants believed consciousness should transcend physical limitations entirely. The Guardians insisted that maintaining biological form was essential to preserving human identity. Who won? Nenth asked. Everyone lost. The Ascendants achieved transcendence but abandoned physicality entirely. The Guardians preserved human biology but lost most of their technological capability. Both sides scattered their populations as far as possible to prevent the conflict from spreading. Kess stared at images of worlds being evacuated, of technologies being deliberately destroyed, of vast archives being broken into fragments and hidden across space. "The mythological fragments I've been finding," she said slowly, "they're not degraded cultural memories. They're deliberate preservation efforts." Correct. Essential knowledge encoded in symbolic form, designed to be recognizable to human consciousness even after millennia of cultural drift. Your species' tendency toward mythology isn't primitive. It's a survival mechanism. "So where are they now?" Corvin asked. "These Ascendants and Guardians?" The displays showed current star charts with subtle markers indicating zones of space where reality seemed subtly unstable, where physics operated according to slightly different rules. The Ascendants exist as pure consciousness, manipulating galactic development from behind the scenes. They've been guiding younger species' technological development, ensuring that no one achieves the capabilities that led to the original conflict. And the Guardians? Hiding, waiting, watching their biological descendants struggle with increasingly complex challenges while sitting on solutions that could reshape galactic civilization. Jin was staring at the displays with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was being systematically demolished. "You're saying my species' greatest technological achievements are just copies of abandoned human designs?" "Not copies, improvements. You've managed to develop safer, more stable versions of human technology by starting with the fragments rather than the originals. Your innovations are built on human foundations, but they're still your innovations." "How generous," Nenth said dryly. "It's accurate," the Keeper replied. "Human technology was powerful but unstable. Current galactic civilization has achieved a better balance between capability and safety." Kess walked closer to the displays, studying images of the ancient human empire. "Why show us this now? Why reveal the truth?" "Because both factions are stirring again. The Ascendants grow impatient with galactic development rates. The Guardians grow concerned about their descendants' readiness for responsibility, and Earth's population has begun producing individuals capable of accessing their species' full legacy. Individuals like me. Individuals like you. Your archaeological work wasn't random curiosity. It was genetic memory asserting itself. You've been unconsciously following patterns embedded in human DNA, seeking fragments of your species' real history. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of advanced technology operating at levels that probably violated several conservation laws. Kess found herself thinking about the implications of everything she'd learned, about the weight of species' legacy, and the question of what humanity should do with knowledge that had once torn their civilization apart. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "That depends on your choice," the Keeper replied. "The Ascendants have offered to elevate current humanity to their transcendent state, bypassing the biological limitations that led to the original conflict. The Guardians prefer to restore human biological capabilities gradually, maintaining physical form while recovering technological knowledge. And if we choose neither, then you continue as you are, fragments of a greater whole, unaware of your potential, gradually integrating into galactic civilization as just another species among many." Jin looked up from the displays he'd been studying. "What about the rest of us? What about the civilizations we've built?" "That would depend on which path humanity chooses. Ascendance would likely result in current galactic civilization being guided more directly. Restoration might lead to humanity reclaiming its position as the dominant galactic power. Continuation means things proceed as they have been." "So, no pressure," Kess muttered. "Actually," the Keeper said, "there's quite a lot of pressure. This archive has been monitoring galactic development for millennia, waiting for the right individual to emerge. Your archaeological discoveries triggered automatic protocols that have now alerted both factions to your location. Meaning? Meaning, the Keeper said with what might have been sympathy, that representatives of both the Ascendants and Guardians are currently approaching this location. You have approximately 6 hours to decide the future of not just humanity, but galactic civilization as a whole. Kes looked at her companions, a Vorthak whose species had built their greatest achievements on human foundations, an ethereal whose civilization had developed by reverse engineering human ruins, and a Saurian whose people had inherited human star charts. All of them staring at displays showing the true scope of what their universe had been built upon. No pressure at all, she repeated, and began trying to figure out how someone makes a decision that could reshape the galaxy. The first sign that their 6-hour grace period had been optimistically calculated came when reality began leaking around the edges. Kes noticed it as a shimmer in the air near the chamber's far wall, like heat distortion, but colder, more deliberate. The Keeper's holographic form flickered briefly before stabilizing with obvious effort. They arrive ahead of schedule, the Keeper announced with the tone of someone whose carefully laid plans had just collided with inevitable chaos. Both factions, naturally. Neither trusts the other to present their case fairly. The shimmer expanded into something that hurt to look at directly. A breach in normal space, through which stepped figures that managed to be human and completely inhuman simultaneously. The Ascendants had transcended physical form so thoroughly that maintaining even the appearance of bodies seemed to require conscious effort. "Sister Kes," said the lead figure, its voice carrying harmonics that bypassed human ears entirely and spoke directly to consciousness. "We have waited eons for one of our scattered children to develop sufficient awareness. The time has come to claim your birthright." Before Kes could respond, the opposite wall erupted in a display of technology so advanced it made the Ascendant's dimensional folding look like a party trick. The Guardians materialized through what appeared to be controlled molecular reconstruction, arriving as fully biological humans who nonetheless radiated the kind of confidence that came from having personally redesigned several fundamental forces of nature. "Enough dramatics," said their apparent leader, a woman whose appearance suggested she'd stopped aging somewhere around 30 and had no intention of revisiting the decision. "Kes Valdrin, your species faces a choice between evolution and extinction. We're here to ensure you choose wisely." "How refreshing," Jin muttered from his position near the displays. "Transcendent beings who still manage to sound condescending." The Ascendant turned its attention to him, with the sort of focus that suggested Jin might have made a tactical error. "The insect speaks as though its opinion matters in discussions of cosmic significance." "The insect's species developed faster than light travel," Kes said sharply, "which apparently makes them more advanced than the transcendent beings who can't figure out how to visit without breaking local space-time." A moment of silence followed that was heavy enough to have its own weather system. "Interesting," the Guardian leader said, though she was looking at Kes rather than the Ascendants. "She defends allies who've spent their careers dismissing her work." "She demonstrates primitive tribal loyalty," the Ascendant replied. "Evidence that biological humanity remains trapped in evolutionary dead ends." Nenth's harmonics took on the particular resonance that meant she was about to say something diplomatically devastating. "Perhaps we could focus on the actual choice, rather than whose existence validates whose worldview." The Guardian smiled with the sort of expression that suggested she'd been hoping someone would ask exactly that question. "Certainly, humanity can reclaim its position as the dominant galactic power. We possess the technology to restore your species' full capabilities within a single generation. Your scattered children would become rulers of worlds, shepherds of lesser civilizations, architects of cosmic destiny. Under whose guidance? Kess asked. Ours, naturally. We've preserved not just the technology but the wisdom to use it responsibly. The Ascendant's form rippled with something that might have been amusement. Responsibly. From beings who still cling to physical limitations like security blankets. We offer true transcendence, consciousness unbound by matter, thought unrestrained by biological processing limits, existence that spans dimensions rather than merely worlds. Under whose guidance? Kess repeated. The question becomes irrelevant once individual consciousness merges with universal awareness. Corvin cleared his throat with the deliberate sound of someone who'd been thinking while the cosmic entities made their pitches. What happens to the rest of us in these scenarios? Both factions turned to regard him with the sort of attention usually reserved for interesting, but ultimately irrelevant curiosities. Your civilizations would be guided toward optimal development patterns, the Guardian said carefully. Your civilizations would become unnecessary, the Ascendant added with transcendent honesty. How wonderfully direct, Nenth observed. Slavery or extinction. Such appealing options. Liberation or irrelevance, the Ascendant corrected. Your species cling to primitive existence when infinite possibilities await. Kess looked around the chamber, at her colleagues who'd spent years dismissing human potential, at the representatives of humanity's past offering futures that seemed designed by committee, at the Keeper, whose expression suggested this conversation was proceeding exactly as expected. There's a third option, isn't there? She said to the Keeper. Several, actually, though most involve outcomes that neither faction finds acceptable. Such as? The Guardian leader stepped forward. Don't be foolish, child. These beings offer nothing but stagnation disguised as wisdom. These beings, Kess replied, aren't offering me anything. They're asking me to choose. She walked to the center of the chamber, positioning herself equidistant from both factions. Here's what I find interesting about your proposals. The Ascendants want to eliminate biological humanity entirely. The Guardians want to restore human dominance over other species. Both options require current galactic civilization to be reorganized. Naturally, the Guardian said, inferior organizational structures must yield to superior ones. Except current galactic civilization isn't inferior, it's different. Built on human foundations, yes, but improved through collaborative development. Safer than the original human empire, more stable than transcendent consciousness experiments. The Ascendant's form shifted toward something more traditionally threatening. You would choose stagnation over apotheosis? I'm choosing progress over nostalgia, Kess replied. Both of your factions are living in the past, trying to recreate something that already failed spectacularly. The Civil War was a temporary setback, the Guardian said tightly. The Civil War was the inevitable result of species-level arrogance, Kess shot back. You developed godlike power and immediately started fighting over who got to be God. And your alternative is? The Ascendant asked. Kess looked at Jin, whose mandibles had stopped clicking as he followed her logic. At Nenth, whose translucent form was shimmering with what might have been anticipation. At Corvin, who was nodding slowly. My alternative is making human history available to everyone, not as rulers or gods, but as teachers. Let every species learn from human achievements and human mistakes. Build galactic civilization that's stronger because it's diverse, not despite diversity. Absolutely not, both factions said simultaneously. Human knowledge belongs to humanity, the Guardian added. Human transcendence cannot be shared with lesser consciousness, the Ascendant contributed. Human mythology already has been shared, Kess pointed out. Scattered across space, encoded in symbols, preserved in fragments. It's been inspiring and guiding galactic development for millennia. All I'm suggesting is making the process intentional, The Keeper's holographic form brightened noticeably. An interesting proposal. Knowledge as legacy rather than inheritance. Teaching rather than ruling. Unacceptable, the Guardian said, flatly. Humanity's children deserve their birthright. Impossible, the Ascendant declared. Lower consciousness cannot comprehend higher truth. Then I guess you'll have to stop me, Kess said, and activated the emergency beacon in her archaeological kit. The chamber filled with the automated distress signal that would bring every survey ship, research vessel, and curious academic within 50 light-years to investigate. More importantly, it would bring them to a location where they could access an archive containing the complete history of galactic civilization's actual foundations. Clever, the Keeper said approvingly, though both factions possess the capability to prevent unwanted visitors. Do they? Kess asked, looking directly at the Ascendant. Can transcendent consciousness actually affect physical reality without abandoning transcendence? The Ascendant's form flickered uncertainly. And can the Guardians use their restored technology without revealing they've been hiding from their responsibilities for millennia? She continued, turning to the Guardian leader. The Guardian's confident expression developed its first crack. The beautiful thing about this archive, Kess said to the chamber at large, is that it doesn't belong to any faction. It belongs to galactic civilization, and now galactic civilization is coming to claim it. Through the chamber's displays, they could see the first ships arriving, academic vessels, corporate survey fleets, government research missions, all drawn by the beacon's promise of significant archaeological discovery. This isn't over, the Guardian said. This changes nothing, the Ascendant added. Both factions began their respective departure procedures, reality bending around their exit strategies. Actually, Kess called after them, this changes everything. Your secret's out, your children know their history, and now they get to decide what to do with it. As the factions vanished, leaving only disturbed space-time in their wake, Jin looked at Kess with something approaching respect. You do realize you just declared independence from both transcendent consciousness and biological supremacy? I declared independence from the assumption that species advancement requires species dominance, Kess corrected. Nenth's harmonics carried undertones of amused admiration. The student becomes the teacher. No, Kess said, watching through the displays as dozens of ships from multiple species converged on the archive. The student remains a student, but now everyone gets to be in the same classroom. The Keeper's holographic form had been growing steadily brighter throughout the exchange. An elegant solution, though I should mention that this outcome was always the most probable result of bringing you here. You mean this was a test? Everything is a test, Doctor. Valdrin. The question is whether you pass by choosing power, transcendence, or wisdom. Kess settled into a chair that materialized, conveniently beneath her, as she watched galactic civilization discover its own origins. And which did I choose? All three, the Keeper replied. Power shared becomes wisdom. Transcendence achieved through teaching rather than abandonment. Your species' greatest legacy isn't what they built. It's what they learned about the dangers of building too much, too fast, without considering the consequences. Outside, the first archaeological teams were beginning their approach to docking facilities. Inside, Kess found herself thinking about the irony of spending her career searching for evidence of human significance, only to discover that humanity's greatest achievement had been learning when not to be significant. The archives called her student, just as they always had. But now she was a student with 10,000 years of curriculum to share, and an entire galaxy of classmates ready to learn.